What is the urban health culture of the future? Hi, my name is Marcin Wojciech-Żebrowski, and this is the newest episode of Urbcast, my podcast about urbanism, cities, architecture, and many more. I am extremely excited to invite you to the newest conversation in Urbcast, which will be together with Helle Juul, who is the renowned architect from Denmark. Dr. Helle Juul is the founding partner of Juul & Frost ARKITEKTER from Denmark, from Copenhagen, and also the vice president and member of governing board International Urban Development Association. In our conversation today, we will talk about the urban health culture of the future, which is a research and development project that was carried out by Juul Frost Architects in the close collaboration with an interdisciplinary think tank and with Holbæk Municipality and Aalborg Municipality as project partners. Since a long time running this podcast, I'm emphasizing the key importance of interdisciplinary approach to design. It is so important for innovation, but also, in general, it is so important to bridge the research and design disciplines so they supplement each other, and then we are able to design healthier cities, the one that respond to the real needs and problems of people living in them. And we will talk with Helle about how to ensure the connection between health and planning. Even though both me and Helle are living in Copenhagen, this conversation was recorded in Poland, in Warsaw, and it happened thanks to the Danish Embassy in Poland and especially Katarzyna Wojda, and I'm very, very thankful for that. The Royal Danish Embassy in Warsaw is working on a project called the Twin Transition of Cities. And within this project, they have an ambition to holistically address cities' sustainable development, starting with building and going beyond them, and also to share some of the Danish approach and Danish experience to designing our cities into the Polish cities as well. Probably you will hear more about this project in this podcast, but for now, I wanted to invite you to the newest conversation with Helle Juul, in which we'll talk about the urban health culture of the future. Helle, I would like just to start by saying welcome to Urbcast. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for inviting.
And today I would like to focus on the urban health culture of the future, the tools you've created during your research project. But before that, I would like to ask you about something else. I would like to ask you about your general interest, maybe not only in architecture, but in the research. I see your office as a really research-based one. And I think that, unfortunately, there are still some offices that are purely based on design, but not so much in the research and how the buildings are affecting our life and so on. So what was like your main inspiration for actually being really, really, really into the research while also designing the buildings, but also the public spaces?
Actually, I ran for Henning Larsen for many years a Scala Architecture Gallery, where all these icons of architecture came by in a small cellar at Gråbrødre Torv. And after that, I felt that I didn't knew very much about deconstructivism. Now we're in the 80s. So actually, I took at that time a PhD at the Royal Academy. And because I was curious about what impact, how we could actually create a new spatial idea to have a more contextual spatial concept based upon classical spatial ideas, etc. So actually, I was fascinated by space, art, and the art development, etc., trying to, at that time, also to create a tool for a new spatial conception. And actually, it was about the classical spatial conception towards the modern classical conception. And I think I carried that into our office. So we have always balanced what we are designing between the classical and the modern. So there are some movement in the modern way of thinking, which actually in the classical, it's more stable. So symmetry, etc., are somehow opposed in the modern time and the modern, especially if you talk about Mondrian, etc. So I think already at that time, creating all the in-betweens and also the tools was actually very inspiring for me. So I'm married to Frost, and we are actually complementary. So we have always had various opportunities to make research project or investigating or getting a lot of support from councils, art councils, etc., to do something different that helped our profession and helped ourselves, of course, in designing. So also this publication is, of course, meant as a strategic tool also for our office, because it's very important that we think, not only think and say we are thinking holistically, but actually that we can see how we are actually working with it. And that practicality is a balance which already started in the beginning of the 90s when I did my PhD. So this balancing between something I knew, creating something which is not actually very known, has always been a teaser, sort of. So it's a very special part of our DNA, actually. And as we did our office together, then I had the so-called power in to somehow to work with that as a creative tool as well. So it has been very much a part of our urban strategies, our urban projects, our master plan, our way of dealing with public spaces, etc. So that way of all the time have small tools that actually are guiding and somehow questioning and so on. It's really inspiring.
And in the context of this research project that we are talking about, but also like overall in your office's work, what do you think should come first, or what comes first in your daily work? Is it the research that drives the design, or maybe it's the opposite? It's the design that drives the research, because first you need to design something to be able to test and to study it and to get to know about the results, right? As Jan Gehl was together with his wife was studying the life in Italy on the different squares. Those squares had to be built first. So that's what I mean.
Yeah, for me, it's more balanced actually, because sometimes you can derive some new knowledge out of a space that actually intrigues you. And sometimes, you have an idea saying, how do we elaborate tools? I think it's very much, again, a hybrid. It's a reversible situation, which you cannot say what is deriving a fantasy. You have to, sometimes it's happening out in the real world. It could also be not actually our own projects. So to me, it always have been very interesting to have other professions in the office. So now we have philosopher, and we have always had people that actually are not actually saying exactly the same as architects are saying, because otherwise we are not actually innovative. I think we have to be a little bit touched upon and trying to explain things. And if you do that to people that are not actually educated into our field, then you test yourself in the way that you communicate. I think it's an ambition of being maybe not a traditional architect, because I'm not a very good designer. Fortunately, I'm married to a very good designer. I'm better in analyzing and talking about, consistency, qualities, and being consistent exactly in the way we are doing things. So that way it's again complementary.
And that's something that I assume was also an inspiration for you to do the deep dive into such a research project, because we are actually talking of a body of research that was done for 3 years, right? We are talking about quite a long period of time, because 3 years for now, it's actually around the time when the COVID pandemic started. And this is why also I did this introduction, because I wanted to talk about the needs that you are discussing in your publication. You are discussing the mental, the social, the physical needs, and also the planning and behavior. Am I right? Was the COVID pandemic and the way that our city life changed the inspiration behind you looking into the health aspects? Or was it way earlier that you actually realized how important the health is in the way we design our cities?
It was before. It started by concept of city well-being. And we were doing a big seminar actually at the Danish Embassy in Moscow. And I realized that those companies that were Danish companies that were actually attending that would not actually understand if we're just talking about projects, but actually talking about an overall concept of quality of life, active living, etc. So at that time, also through an invitation from the Foreign Ministry, we said, okay, we're not only talking about projects, we're talking about a concept of ideas. And it was, we have always, Danish architects are very based on social qualities, neighborhoods, being social, adaptive to society and to the demands of society and so on. So, of course, we didn't invent the city of well-being. It's done by a lot of other people. But it inspired us to say that if we are putting energy into that concept, how would that then look if we are doing it as a practicing architectural firm? But it also changed our perspective, because we saw that these companies that were present was Lundbeck and all these huge B-looks, etc. And actually they understood basically that invitation to how can we do this together. I still say we have to do this together because if we are the only ones, then we will not reach out to the majority. Then afterwards, I tried to figure out a way of applying for support from Royal Dania and from pension companies, and we have sent thousands of applications. And then we had not at all what we expected, but a little bit so we actually could start up. And then we have invested the rest for ourselves, because then it turned out to be so basic in the way we are somehow consistently driving from our social DNA to also to talk about mental and physical. So it's not only to be social, it's actually the whole. And then we discussed with some of our friends, a doctor who is actually from Lundbeck, talking about loneliness. And he's a part of the think tank now, together with a lot of other people. And I think then we realized that there's more into this than just saying, because people are actually, and even ourselves, we are never addressing the issue of being lonely in our urban projects. But we should, and we should remember it as a condition for how we are future securing the social life of the inhabitants of our building areas, housing areas, etc.
What was your main argument? Because you said that you've been struggling a bit to acquire the funds and to get people on board to start this project. What arguments did you use? Because I think that, of course, also because of the mentioned pandemic, I feel like people living in Europe, in Denmark, in Poland, we tend to be more aware of the well-being and the social needs. So do you still need to, try to convince people about the importance of those aspects?
No, I think everybody knows it is important, but it's not very many that would like to invest in it.
That's the problem.
So that's another thing. No, and I think also it's very important all the time to stress that we started in April 2019 just to line this idea up, because there's so many projects which are derived out of the pandemic. And I really think that this is a little bit pathetic that we only are thinking about health and well-being but because we have had a pandemic. I think it's important to say we have to think about it all the time. It's not because there is something coming in, even though that now we are also in a crisis. So now we are cutting out our lights and so on. We should do that in a long time before. But crises are good for something, because then we actually maintain common understanding. I think it's very much a question of, okay, everybody is nodding, saying now it's important to save electricity, and now it's important about the health. We have huge developers that actually now are saying, okay, how can we apply this to an urban area so that this is the profile for people that are moving in? This is the attraction. So this is an area where we have created that added value, that here it's easy to meet your neighbors, here it's easy to go for a walk together, and all these elements that we are trying to elaborate on in the publication or in the book.
And to do that, you chose different cases. It's a case of the 20-minute city, the super blocks, well-known concept from Barcelona. There is also the Gillette Square and Vanguard Urban Gardens. What was the key in choosing those particular cases?
We had a huge amount of cases. I think we know everything about biophilia and everything. But I think basically we had to concentrate and say, okay, these 4 cases should actually scale-wise represent both a strategic, but also something about mobility and a strategy in an existing situation. And Gillette Square is interesting because it's a part of a strategy, but it's a total, not very attractive space. And Vapnagård is that, everybody knows byhaver, gardens in, and we have done that for 15 years. But I think they add a little more extra, because I looked into a video and a YouTube video, and I think there's a lot of layers of small invitations from people living in this, and also the consequence that actually people that hates to live in this ghetto area, but finally they say, okay, we will stay here. And I think that process of hate an area, but because you are actually getting to know the people and you feel obliged to help them out and so on. And there are some people that are driving forces. And I think a driving force in an area is also incredibly important. It's very hard to find. You cannot just create a driving force, but you can hope that in an area there are driving forces that actually say, okay, voluntarily, I would go into this. Wow, this is exciting. And I'll get to know my neighbors, and I will go and I will do food with you, and I will do a lot of things. So in that way, it's the 4 represents so many various aspects, scale-wise, strategic-wise, urban-wise, etc. So it felt, after a long time, natural to select these 4.
Were there some cases that were maybe equally interesting to you, but they didn't make the cut?
Yeah, of course. Actually, just now I don't recall. There's a guy in Austria. He is creating a fantastic project. He's called Renner, which we looked into. We worked with 3D models, etc. Trying to use and present the changes. I think also the biophilic, the high-rise, the green high-rises from Milan. This office is incredibly interesting because they are actually creating a manifest, and through that they are doing things so much different. But that's something we can apply. As soon as you have a client that say, okay, we could do this and this, or we could have an article writing about biophilia. Also, this certification thing that one of the guys today talked about. In America, they are certifying all these things. I think it's very complicated to do that in Denmark. Of course, it's a way of saying there's something which is you can check, and then you can say it, now it's good enough. But maybe it's possible. So that's right, of course. But they are still there. They didn't disappear. So a volume 2 will contain this,
Because that's what I'm saying. There are so many interesting case studies around the world. So like you choosing only 4, it's like also like such a complicated work to do, because like you need to assess them very thoroughly. And also, as I understand, like those cases that you chose, that you use them also to create some tools. And those tools, I think that this is something that I would like to also ask you about, because I hope that this report, that it can be also used by different municipalities, maybe also other architecture offices, different also actors and players involved in creating cities. So those tools, the multidisciplinary, the holistic and strategic planning tools that you created, how can someone reading this report, how can they use them? We can just mention some of them. They are the equal opportunities for well-being, or demand co-creation, or using urban nature as an active resource. So how did you try to translate those into like a real action, and what those actions could be?
The whole process of how we got to there, they have also been named differently. We derived from the cases, from theories, from the think tanks' contribution. We actually derived from each of them, and then we puzzle them together. And I think, for instance, equality is a very complicated issue. We have Morten Klücker, who is a professor at Syddansk University. He's actually head of the Sundhedsprofilen, health profile. And he's talking about, of course, what they do, but also equality, because actually there are people that are not able to choose where they live. So they might live in places where, the air pollution is more present. But I think if we as architects, planners, and municipalities are somehow thinking about it, just as not as a condition, but as an inspiration to, if we do this and this, or if we create a deeper pavement, then we get a distance to traffic, or I think just a consciousness. So I believe that's actually the intention, is that that other offices, municipalities, etc., clients, etc., of course, we would like them to ask us to help them. On the other hand, of course, they can be inspired and they can say, okay, we never actually really went into that discussion. Maybe we should do that in this and this area. Because I think what is the potential of these tools is that you can pick 3 of them and then you can say, okay, these are very important in this area because here we are lacking this and this and this. Or if we say you are in a process, okay, maybe you should ask some researchers because they know a lot of facts. And I think it has been incredibly valuable for us in this process because they have been so active, they have been present, and I didn't pay them very much. So, because I think these facts that researchers are really working with is what we can convince our clients. Because as soon as we know that 4 out of 10 are not actually physically active, or 17% are lonely, and et cetera, as soon as you have these numbers, then this evidence is much more powerful, actually. And I think as we talked with another, as architects, we're not trained to work with numbers. We think that actually, okay, they can see it's better. But actually, that's not how the world is working. Now, I think that the world have to have facts to be able to react. So that's a consequence of that type of world we're living in. And I think also it's also giving another thought that it's not only a question of saying, oh, we like that better. It's actually quite important that we have some numbers. And I think also when we are talking about our approach to this, using this health profile to know and to map an area with how many unemployed, how is education level, how many are smoking, how many are drinking, how many are living in rented areas, rented housing, and so on. This knowledge is not a basic knowledge when we normally are doing a master plan or doing an urban area. I think that knowledge actually gives us another insight, and that's very easy for anyone else to use, of course. But actually to go that way and say, this area has this social profile. So when we can see that, then you also know which buttons, which needs you have to. So this is a reaction on the living quality of the individual and the people. And I think I like that idea that we are reacting on reality and not because we think it could be nice.
I'm glad that you've mentioned the numbers, because I think that this is also why you've created this piece of research, because the beauty, the air quotes, good design is very subjective, right? And it's easy as an architect to just draw something and say, okay, that's going to be good, that's going to be beautiful, that's going to be amazing. But it's not going to happen until you actually will ask the community, the local community, and not only, but all the different stakeholders about how it actually affects their needs. Does it answer to the needs, right? And just to clarify the whole process, you would just analyze the different needs in a given situation or in a given area. So the mental or the social or the physical. Then you would apply some tools. So for example, the equally in health or green areas or active living. And then that would develop into planning, like a composition, which would result into a given behavior that would improve the situation. Is that how this matrix could be applied?
Yeah, but it's not just that because I think everything also with a client is a dialogue. So actually, of course, this has to be equivalent to, for instance, a company profile or a municipality. Maybe they have an architecture policy which actually says this and this and this. So actually, what is a priority for them? So you cannot do everything just like that, but you can actually give a priority to some issues and then create maybe discussions or dialogues. And then this effect is unfortunately always coming a little too late. So you can say that in an area you can make temporary actions, which maybe within a short time can sort of change the way of perceiving a specific area from very unsafe to, it's rather nice, now, actually, the lady with the interior showed it with green, but it has to be more than well-being. It has also to, in an urban setting, it has to be also an urban condition that actually goes in. So I think everything is about, now we created frame box, and then, of course, it has to be, massaged into a local area. And areas are different. And I think that's the precondition. Because it's different if it's north of Copenhagen or it's north of Esbjerg or, various places, or in Rosengården, which is a ghetto area in Malmö where we have some discussions. So, of course, the identity and the DNA of an area and that combination of people is deriving also a consciousness. And then you have to give a priority to these tools, how you can actually, so you all the time have a new way of doing it if you cannot actually create something which you think is wow.
So it's a set of tools. It's, so to say, a toolbox that should be adjusted to a given area. And that's what brings me to my last question, is that when someone is just getting familiar with the report that you provided, what should be so-called next step? So if we treat this report also as a tool for different actors, because also the last part of this research is the shared responsibility, right? That we need to do change and act on the problems together. So what should be the action maybe that you would expect someone to do after getting familiar with your work?
We do a lot of work just now to try to convince both developers, municipalities, clients, pension, to somehow to come back and say, okay, maybe we make workshops, but then pilot project, which actually could show if there is a difference, which of course we have to try to fight for pilot projects where we are actually able to show that is before and after. And it could be very, very, it could be an intention and it could be like that. It can be worked out in many ways, but I think there's a lot of developers that actually are doing exactly the same as cities. They're trying to create a profile that actually making them different from their colleagues so some of them actually are now saying, okay, we have some problems in areas. We are actually working with our own health and we are not as far. So maybe we can get inspired. Maybe we can do something. So it's not a black and white system. It's an inspirational, which actually can be. And of course, if a company would say, okay, we would like only to concentrate on active living and green. Okay, but then you maybe should be aware that actually maybe the green should adjust to mental or social health. So it can be underlined. So this is a priority. And I think we have to do that together. And that's why it's a shared responsibility as well. Because it's you cannot just go in and say, okay, now we're doing this and then we're home safe. I don't think it works like that. Now it's the phase 2 is a lot of, not cases, a lot of pilot project that shows now we are trying to change how we are thinking about planning.
And do you know when can we expect the first of those pilot projects, or it's still unknown?
It's still unknown, actually. But we actually did something called Pulsparken, which is in Danish, the pulse is active. and where we, throughout this process, we worked with Syddansk University that actually they are asking for, it's a use area very close to a new urban housing area. And they are asking for various pulses, if it's a heart and running and walking, etc. So it's a park which offers a lot of possibilities. And then we asked this guy from a think tank if there was a student that could actually go in, verify the intention, and then go in and say, okay, how are people actually using it now? We have the possibility of, within, I hope, a short time, to have some evidence on that. But it's more a green area. But of course, it could also be interesting in an existing area where you actually think, okay, something is wrong here. People are unsafe. We don't come down. We know a lot of people are not actually coming down and participating in daily social life. So what should be done? And it doesn't have to be very big physical things. I think we have to be smart and do it in a more light way, so that it's also a toolbox that it could be just a mental change sometimes.
Okay, a very gentle shift.
Yeah.
So to say, giving the...
Yeah. As soon as there is a change, I think we should be happy, because small steps are also quite important.
The last question I wanted to ask is normally about a book recommendation, but I think that in this episode, we could just share our other recommendation, which is the Health Culture of the Future report that we've been discussing. Could you tell the listeners where can they find it? In Danish or in English, actually, as I learned as I realized just today before our conversation, that the English version is also accessible. So where can people find it and learn more?
The publication is at our website, ARKITEKTER, and under publication. And both the Danish version and the English, the translated version, also possible to get from Arkitektens shop. They are both where it can be downloaded, and it can also be sold in physical form. So it's rather easy to go to. And it's very important. It's not a secret for anyone. It's an open invitation.
Thank you. And I think it's so amazing that you work on this study and you are now sharing it with the others, given it can be other architecture studio that can look up some tools that you propose here, or a municipality or some other city makers. And I hope it's not only addressed to the ones in Denmark, but internationally.
No. It's very important that it's a crossing border. That's also why it's translated, because actually we feel that there are more interest even here, but also in Sweden. We have this collaboration with this School of Architecture in Barcelona, and they are really interested because now they see we are complementary in a way. And it's very inspiring that people are actually somehow reacting.
Yeah.
But it's recently that it was translated, so they have to figure out now.
Helle, thank you for sharing all the background behind this publication. And I assume it's not the last one?
I hope not.
Probably you will work on more. You also announced there will be the second part. So I'm looking forward to that. And so far, I wanted to thank you so much for sharing all the story behind it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks. You. Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and I need to assure you that it was extremely inspiring conversation to have. Helle Juul is having a huge experience in research, and as she said in the beginning of our conversation, she's better at researching and not as much in designing herself, and this is why it's so important that we think, talk, and work interdisciplinary. If you like this conversation, and especially if you liked the information about the report and about the research project, you will find it both in English and in Danish. And I will add the link in the description so you can just easily find it and just check it yourself. Thank you. I hope that it was also inspiring to you. One more time, thank you very much to the Royal Danish Embassy in Poland, to Katarzyna Wojda, and I will talk to you soon.